So today I will be talking about the behavioral section, and within that, I'm talking about biology and behavior today. These are my goals. I won't read over them every day, but you can read through this if you'd like. And then today we're focusing on behavioral. The first topic is biology and behavior. Our first topic ever. If I go back to the quick sheet, that's what mainly this section is about, the nervous system. So that's what I am focusing mainly on for this video. So we're going to talk about the nervous system. It's made out of two systems, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. I drew this picture just to show what it really is. Central meaning brain, and spinal cord, and peripheral meaning literally everything else. So let's first focus on the central nervous system, which is composed of the brain and spinal cord. So I broke that up from brain and spinal cord. Spinal cord is pretty easy. I don't think the MCAT will go too much in depth about the spinal cord and what it relates to for this section, but the main thing, it transmits motor and sensory information between the brain and the rest of the body, and that transmission is better explained in the PNS, which is the peripheral nervous system, later on, so I can explain that later, but that's just a broad review of what the spinal cord does. Let's focus on the brain. So there are major lobes of the brain: the frontal lobe, temporal lobe, parietal lobe, and occipital lobe. How I like to think of it is, if this is your face right here, your eyes, your mouth, the frontal is right here, the top of your head, and it's on the front. Parietal, you just have to know. Temporal is like your temples on your face, like just near your outer eyebrows. That's where I think of them. And then occipital is the back of your head. So I usually think of frontal, temporal, your temples, occipital, the back of your head, because your eyes run back there, and then parietal is just the end of process of elimination, what I remember. And then the functions. The frontal lobe is executive, and I think of frontal as being the front of the line, so being the leader of everything. And it consists of long-term planning, which is a prefrontal cortex, the motor functions, which is the primary motor cortex, and speech, which is the Broca's area. So that's the frontal. Parietal, I like to think of it as senses, so your touch, temp, pain, your spatial processing and orientation. So just your senses, that's what I think about when I think of parietal. Occipital is optics, and optics means eyes, so it's everything regarding your vision. Temporal is kind of near your ears and like your face, so I try to think temporal as in sound, your ears, or auditory cortex, and speech as in your mouth, and then memory as in when you think, you like hold on to your temples, or like you put your finger on your temple, so that's kind of how I remember that. And then we have the limbic system, which controls emotion, and that's the temporal lobe. So the limbic system is composed of your hypothalamus, your thalamus, amygdala, and hippocampus. So for the thalamus, it's the relay center. This is like just something that you need to memorize. Thalamus is relay center. Hypothalamus is homeostasis. So I think of the H's for homeostasis and the hypothalamus. And the amygdala, it just seems weird and sounds very angry, so that's where I get anger or aggression and fear. And then for hippocampus, it's from memory. And how I remember that is on campus equals good memories. And then there are some other parts of the limbic system as well that I don't think will show up too often, but just to know. The septal nuclei is for pleasure seeking, and the fornix is for communication in the limbic system. So those are some other terms. So that's mainly the brain. And again, that's for the central nervous system. That's mainly what you would need to know, the basics for the behavioral section of the MCAT. So now let's talk about the peripheral nervous system, or the PNS. So before I like to start talking about the PNS, I like to talk about types of neurons. There's afferent and efferent. Afferent is away from the body and going towards the brain. So those are your senses. So afferent is senses. Efferent is going towards your muscles and your motor responses. So it's from your brain to your target or whatever you're trying to use your muscles for. So again, your afferent is sensory, so how you detect sound, touch, and light. That's information from your brain to, or from your senses to your brain. And then the efferent is from, let me re-say that. Afferent is from your senses to your brain, and efferent is from your brain to your muscles or whatever you're trying to control. So that's the two differences. Motor is what is usually talked about. So we're going to talk about the motor. There's somatic and the autonomic nervous system. So somatic, meaning body, is voluntary. So that's where you get the muscles from. And it's self-explanatory. It's your body and it's moving. So that's how I remember what the somatic system does within the PNS. And then the autonomic is involuntary. So everything that you can't control. So involuntary versus voluntary. Let's talk first about what the autonomic nervous system is, and we'll come down all the way over here. Or before I go there, I would like to talk about the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems. Sympathetic is fight or flight, and parasympathetic is rest and digest. So when your fight or flight system is on, it's an adrenergic agnostic. And then for this one is antagonist, so it's blocking everything. So when you're fighting, everything turns on, and when you're resting, everything is turned off. And then for parasympathetic, when things are turned on, that's when you are eating. And then when things are turned off, that's when you're not eating. So that's the main idea for parasympathetic and sympathetic. Sympathetic is fight or flight, and parasympathetic is rest and digest, and that's something I think we've learned from a long time, like high school biology courses. But just to talk more about what is turning on and what is turning off. So for your rest and digest and your fight or flight, I like to split it up. So when you are in your sympathetic side, your pupils and so many other parts of your body is doing things. So let's say that for the situation for your sympathetic, let's say a bear or some animal is coming after you, and how does your body respond automatically? For sympathetic, your pupils dilate or widen so you can see more. Saliva is inhibited, meaning you aren't doing digestion. And that's the same for the peristalsis right over here. So these two kind of go in hand, because when you're about to fight off an animal, you don't want any organs that need, you don't want organs that don't need to be working, if that makes sense. And then for bronchi, that's your lungs. They're relaxed, which allows for fast breathing. Your heartbeat accelerates so that you can perform whatever you need to perform, whether you need to run or fight. And then your bladder is inhibited because you don't need to digest things. So these three are very well put together. And then piloerection is basically sweating. Sweating is a way to cool down your body, so that needs to be happening. Glucose production is happening, so you have energy. Adrenaline is also produced, so that, and that's just a fight or flight response, a hormone that increases. And then there's also an orgasm as well that is stimulated as well for the fight or flight or sympathetic system. And then everything else is swapped for the parasympathetic system, and that's rest and digest. So let's say you're eating something, you don't really need to pay too much attention to that, so your pupils constrict and you're relaxed. Because digestion is cued, your saliva is stimulated, and so is your digestion. And for your bladder, it I'm not too sure about what I put down for this one. I might refer back to this and explain more. I make a separate video. But yeah, so your lungs are constricted, which is slows breathing because your body is digesting and doesn't need to get oxygen in and out. Your heartbeat slows because there's no need for fast movements. And then bile, which is important for breaking down fatty acids, and that's what lipid emulsion is, and eliminating waste is also happening as well. And these other things are mainly a part of the sympathetic system, so I just put X's on those sides. So that's the autonomic system. And then also part of it is the enteric system, and that is basically the second brain. It kind of goes hand in hand with these two. The parasympathetic, it relates to digesting, but it's not completely, I think it's a different system, if that makes sense. For this system, it's known as the second brain, or the brain in the gut, and it controls the gastrointestinal behaviors. So that's your stomach and water and electrolytes and how things are moving. So that's just automatically done, and that's why it's in this section. So that's a brief overview of the CNS and PNS systems within the nervous system. And then to continue, we can talk about neurotransmitters, and that's chemical messengers from the body that allows for communication. And that is like to go back to like EMP, that's when there's a synapse, and then there are things that are running through and interact with another synapse right here. So those are these little circles right here. These are the neurotransmitters that are talking within the nerves here, and what is released, and that's basically what neurotransmitters are. That's what I think of when I think of neurotransmitters, a way of communicating. So acetylcholine, I remember that's like the first neurotransmitter that I learned in AMP, and that's for voluntary muscle movement, and that's like I don't know the term, but that's how your muscles move, that like throw and pull the muscles, and that's how they move. So that's acetylcholine. Epinephrine and norepinephrine is the fight or flight response. Epinephrine, I think of like an EpiPen and how that like increases everything when you are having an allergic reaction. So that's how I think of epinephrine and norepinephrine. Dopamine is pleasure and satisfaction. Serotonin is like, I think of melatonin, which is for sleep. GABA is, I think of B for brain and brain stability. And endorphins is the feel good neurotransmitter, and that's for it's a natural painkiller. So I usually just memorize these and go over those so I know which one is which and what they are communicating in the body. So that's a little bit about neurotransmitters. And lastly, there's just this little part in the quick sheet about nature versus nurture and how individual traits can be caused by your genes and your environment. And I think that's a huge part of epigenetics, and how I think that's mainly for the environment, how that can impact your genes. But just that it's important to consider that your genes or what you inherit comes from what your parents' genetic makeup is, but also the environment as well that you grew up in, and also that your parents have grown up in, how that can be transferred from transferred to the offspring. So that's a basic overview of biology and behavior section of the behavioral side, and I think it's just foundational, especially for this section of the behavioral side. It's not biology, so it's not super in-depth, but it's a good overview of what you need to know before you continue to learn about behavioral. So that's that for this video. We can check off the first one. So we're done with behavioral or biology and behavior for the behavioral unit for the MCAT. And if you have questions, I won't be putting my email on here, but it's important that you advocate for yourself, and I wouldn't use this as a end all be all of how you study for the MCAT if you do use it as a resource, but mainly just exposure of what other people are doing and what works for you. So that's a little bit about my intentions with this video, and we're done with that, and I'm gonna end the video. Thank you for listening.